So recently, I found a deep love for manga. In fact, I've been reading a decent amount of it in the second half of 2016. My anime watching has indeed suffered quite a bit, but I've been having a great time exploring the wonderful medium of manga. The series I've mentioned today are mostly on the more popular side of the spectrum, as that's what I've been reading lately, but nonetheless, these are 6 awesome manga I read this year. The moment after I finished watching the beastly anime for Naoki Urasawa's Monster, I knew one of the next manga I would be reading was 20th Century Boys. Going into it, I had basically no idea what it was even about. All I knew was the genres, Naoki Urasawa, and the cover on my anime list. So being thrown into this absolutely insane but intricate story about some kids that shape the future of the world was a highly enjoyable trip. Now, if I had read Monster instead of watching the anime, it'd probably be on the list instead, but assuming that the manga is just as good as the anime, consider this as a mention for Naoki Urasawa in general because this man is a genius. While you definitely need to focus on his writing because of the sheer amount of content and information given to you, it's worth it for the mind-blowing masterpieces he has given to us. Though the biggest surprise of the year for me was Genshiken. Now, I say this was a surprise because Welcome to the N.H.K is my favorite anime, and I hear them being compared every so often, usually more in the favor of N.H.K. That, plus the fact Genshiken's anime has never been received all that well, made me stray away for quite some time. But after getting into manga a bit more, I started seeing Genshiken around a bit. Due to the fact that it was almost over when it started catching my attention, I knew this was a great time to get into it. And only a few chapters into the series, I was super into it. Between the humor, its neutral stance on otakus, and the great character interactions, there wasn't much I didn't like. While the pacing was a bit rushed and the choices and character focus were a little more than confusing, by the time I got to the second half titled Second Season, I was absolutely amazed at how far the series had came. In the beginning it was little more than some fun, but then it got into serious character drama and themes I was not expecting in the least. I mean, sure, the first half of Genshiken was great and all, but Second Season is by far the reason why I'm such a big fan of Genshiken now. If you like slice of life anime and or manga and have been into the medium for a while, this is one to invest some time into. With the new anime film released, one of the more relevant manga I've read is A Silent Voice. Although at times it seems as if A Silent Voice is a bit blatant or perhaps overblown to some, its ideas and characters are so well put together that I couldn't help but love it. As much as I love fun comedy and action, we need more series that tackle similar topics with maturity. I myself have never been subject to much bullying aside from typical child teasing, nor was I the bully, but because of the earnest and heartfelt nature of the main character, I was still able to easily identify with the emotional weight behind the subject material. A Silent Voice may not be the absolute best drama out there, but it means well, and ultimately I still fell in love with the main two characters and the messages of the series. So I mentioned earlier that N.H.K is my favorite anime, and it's been that way for a long time. Sure, I did question it every so often maybe a year ago, but I've always loved it and it's never been out of my top 10. So when I decided to read the N.H.K manga, I was so let down. Namely because the first half was just a more negative and rushed version of the anime. It wasn't really that bad, and I certainly liked aspects of it such as the humor and dark feeling, but I couldn't shake the comparison for the longest time. But after having read the second half, I was blown away by how much better it was in the first 3 volumes. In fact, I actually wish some of the content would have made it into the anime. Its pacing was better, the characters felt more alive, and the themes got fleshed out. I wouldn't say it was ever on par with the anime, but for anyone that's a fan of N.H.K, there's a surprising amount of quality content to get out of the manga once the first 3 volumes are done and over. Also, it totally turns Evangelion by the end. Oh boy, if you don't know the backstory between me and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you haven't got a clue how much of a 180 this is. So to give a little extra context, I guess I should explain a bit. Over a year and a half ago, I started watching JoJo 2012 due to the insane praise it was getting from my friend Star 6 Wars 1 and HS Media Nerd, who hyped it up as the best thing of all time. Star 6 Wars 1 in particular put it on a pedestal as, quote, having the same heart as Kuroko no Basket and Gurren Lagann, 2 shows I have a very deep and personal relationship with. Obviously, he was on drugs because I still have no clue how JoJo even tries to be as emotional as either of those two. But even with JoJo not meeting that emotional standard that had been presented to me, I was decently into it until midway through when I had to move and my watching of JoJo was completely derailed. I wasn't into it anymore, I was depressed, and I found every little flaw I could to the point that I dropped it, hated it, and discredited the whole series. But after another fresh move and becoming more open to JoJo again, I started reading it and I finally got it. Maybe it doesn't meet that emotional expectation I once had, but I would be lying if I didn't say JoJo is one of the most fun, creative, and lovable series out there. I have grown to adore JoJo, and every ounce of negative opinions I once had have washed away. I mean, it's JoJo, what more is there to say? It's awesome. In a way, I don't feel comfortable talking about Oyasumi Punpun because of how personal that journey was for me. But because Punpun is my favorite manga and for me is on par with the anime of N.H.K, I can't leave it out of this list. To say that I love the series is a bit of an understatement because of how much it affected me personally. I know this is supposed to be a list of the 6 awesome manga I read this year, so I don't want to get too deep or personal, but Punpun is awesome just in a different way than, say, JoJo. I did do a video on it, and if you really want to know how I felt when reading it, I'd recommend just watching that instead. Otherwise, all I need to say is that I love Punpun like nothing else, and I think I'm gonna leave it at that. Well, with that anticlimactic ending out of the way, that's my time. If you want to find me anywhere else to keep up with me, I have links in the description to Twitter, key to my anime list, and my anime podcast, Cymirth. So this has been N.H.K, aka Marvin, and I'll see you guys later.